Мочи, мочи.
little hairy there once or twice, though.
Yeah, there can definitely be a little some iffy stuff.
Well, I was up on top of that hill, so I had nowhere to run and hide. There was no cover,
Oh,
no water,
yeah.
nothing unless I go down to the beach. So I got one or two that were like 5 bosses, and they all pretty much killed off.
Yeah.
So that,
It's good, but it can
then
also
I
get a little
pinned,
messy, yeah.
well, the lag got me. They had me pinned up against the fence, and I had to jump the fence. But they all had me pinned up against the fence. I couldn't do shit. So, no, it was fun. Yeah, I'm sure I made a bunch of money. So thanks for showing me that. Was cool.
Yeah, you're good. So there's a fast travel right to that peak down there, and then it's like a 1 kilometer run to the island.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What happened? I was playing a game because it said email, and then I came in with it.
It's just an ad. Hi there, I just wanted to get one of my prescriptions filled. Oh no, it's fine. Oh yeah. There you
Thank you.
go. Oh, I see it. Hey guys.
Yeah, I'm just playing the game. And I bought it, but it's nothing like the real game.
You don't like it?
Yeah, like
who'd attacked him by acting stoic and pressing him. Then Richard would take advantage of his still weakened state and just finish off the kid. With him fully healed from earlier, Richard theorized he would get all of his tutorial points and full experience. Caroline may have also gotten some, but that was fine. Caroline was one of his people, after all. The second scenario was what had played out.
Yeah.
William was vulnerable and open to manipulation.
real game.
Despite how powerful he believed himself to be,
Weird.
he was shaken from whatever had just
That's
happened.
fun looking. You're
The
making a
broken
city in
kid
the
was
woods.
even more
That's
broken
good.
than before, so Richard took advantage of that. He stroked his ego and got in. At the final moments, his skill had made him aware that William was now loyal to him. His quest confirmed the same thing, going up a single percentage point. Not that he hadn't been unknowingly loyal for a long time. Richard had purposely sent the less loyal groups to areas the scout informed him William was in. As predictable as he was, William would then kill them. In Richard's mind, this was a win-win. He would have people who weren't loyal to him killed, or he would lose an attack dog. He had only needed to do this 3 times total before he just led his people entirely away from William. For a long time, Richard had hoped that the idiot would just get himself killed against Hayden's men, but sadly that hadn't happened. William, in all his arrogance, was, in the end, still a coward. If he knew a party was strong, he would avoid them entirely. It was almost comical how every time Richard went out, William would go in the exact opposite direction. As to why he decided to bring William in now? Because he was vulnerable enough. Richard could feel his weakness the second he saw him. A broken child, unsure of himself, so Richard gave him the recognition he so dearly craved at that moment. He began by first establishing that he was in power by putting William down, and then extending an offer of partnership to appear like he really needed him. The kid had eaten it raw. His loyalty was fickle, the foundation a fucking mess, but it was enough for now. All of the crafters were already considered loyal to Richard. Perhaps loyalty was the wrong term, but his skill and quest sure counted them. If he had to guess, then he would say it was more reliance than loyalty. Ultimately, he now considered them his people. The only one who didn't give him the response was the smith, but he could handle that in time. It wasn't like he needed everyone to be loyal either. Jacob was another example of this. He shifted loyalty nearly daily. It was peculiar, but Richard never got any sense of danger from the man. The same was true for that guy Bertram, who followed Jacob around at all times. He had never displayed loyalty even once toward Richard, yet he was clearly a trustworthy man who had undying loyalty toward Jacob. Again, it wasn't really a problem, as he clearly cared for Caroline, and Caroline was undoubtedly loyal. It was necessary to have William converted or dead. All Richard now had left was Hayden and his party and a possible third threat, a.k.a. what had attacked William. Oh, and on a final note for William, while he was a useful dog, he wasn't exactly a good dog. A bit too feral for Richard's taste. A wild dog couldn't just be tamed that quickly, after all. You could feed it and keep it loyal for a while, but Richard wasn't under any illusions that William wouldn't end up backstabbing him at some point. Against Hayden, William would be a helpful tool. It was the only reason it even bothered to convert him today. But once Hayden and his camp were either assimilated or decimated, the mad dog would have to be put down. Chapter 45. Shadow Vault and Instincts. In a small corner of the tutorial forest, a very peculiar thing was happening. A man was repeatedly jumping around, more times than not finding himself smashing face first into a tree. He seemed to turn into something resembling a shadow, quickly moving forward and then turning back to his normal, tangible form with every jump. This weird man was, naturally, Jake, testing out his newly acquired basic Shadow Vault of Umbra. The skill took quite a bit of getting used to, which was the reason why he needed to practice it as much as he did. The skill was quite simple, actually. With little to no warning or preparation, Jake could speed up his movement in any direction he was currently moving, turning into a shadow-like substance, and then appear once more whenever he reached his designated target, or when the uptime of the skill ran out. When he was a shadow, no physical object could touch him, instantly making Jake want to try phasing through walls. Sadly, that hope was quickly squashed. While he could phase through small things, he had no way of getting through a tree, for example. If he thought back to his fight with that caster William, he also doubted he could get past the wall of iron. He found that objects with a high mana density were harder to phase through, and a conjured wall had to be very mana dense. He could, however, phase through smaller objects. So, dodging through the swing of a sword, a thrown dagger, or an arrow was entirely possible, though he did notice that it increased mana consumption when he did so. The reason he kept crashing into things was the speed increase and the disorientating effect of suddenly accelerating. It was like suddenly stepping on an escalator going far above what any safety standard would ever permit. One moment he would move normally, and the next suddenly accelerate several times that speed for less than a second. The skill itself wasn't teleportation, after all, but just swift movement. However, to the untrained eye, it could easily appear as if he had just teleported when he used the skill at maximum output. The fact that he took on the characteristics of a shadow only made it more challenging to use. It was like suddenly becoming weightless, and everything just felt off. The direct line movement also made it even more confusing. So he trained. As the saying goes, practice makes perfect. While he wasn't exactly aiming for perfection on his first day with the skill, he needed to be at least able to use it without accidentally getting himself killed during combat. He could totally see himself crashing into something far more dangerous than a tree. The damage he took to both his health and mana pools when he crashed into objects, like trees, was already quite insane to begin with. The sudden momentum coming to an instant stop made his mana instantly drain by several hundred points, and his health points drop even more. One lucky thing with the skill was that it also phased all his equipment. Even if he had a bow in his hand, it too took on a shadowy look. He tried it with a couple of different things, and found that pretty much anything he touched would get shadow vaulted with him. It did increase both mana and stamina consumption of the skill, though. He also discovered, with some experimenting, that the enchantment with his boots did indeed reduce stamina expenditure. And despite it saying it was only by a small amount, it turned out to be quite significant. It wasn't just a straight-up percentage decrease, but had some more advanced math behind it. If he did a small vault, consuming only 5 stamina with the boots as an example, the cost got reduced by a whopping 3 points. In other words, a 60% reduction. However, if he did a more extended vault, consuming 30 stamina, the boots would only reduce it by 10 points or so, around a 33% reduction. His maximum consumption from a single vault so far had been 78 stamina, and then it had reduced cost by 17, which was a weird 22% or so reduction. Quite honestly, the math behind it stumped him, and he decided just to write it off as the system doing system things. There clearly was a pattern somewhere. He doubted it would just be entirely random. Jake just didn't see the value in crunching the math and trying to discover the formula. Without it, he already had a good feeling for how much stamina he was consuming, and he didn't exactly have time to calculate much during combat, especially not with a defensive skill. The vault also consumed mana where no reduction was available. The cost was around the same as the stamina counterpart, not counting the reduction. The mana expenditure got a lot higher, however, if he phased through objects of any kind. Luckily, Wisdom was still his highest stat by quite a bit, and he didn't really use much mana during normal combat. So despite the relatively high cost of dodging through objects, he could manage. He couldn't help but think of how useless the skill would feel if he only had his archer class, however. The mana consumption would drain him in only a few vaults, leaving him with a dead skill. But with his current resource pools, he could easily make tens of high-powered jumps, if he could avoid smashing his head into things, that is. But he was getting better, and fast. In only a few hours, he had gotten the short jumps down, and was quickly able to move a few meters back and forth in fluid movements. The long vaults were still quite hard, but that too was improving drastically for every minute. Honestly, his bloodline abilities felt like a total cheat here too. His sphere was utterly unaffected by him turning all shadowy, and kept him completely aware of his surroundings. He knew when he was about to hit something, and he seemed to slowly be able to train his instinct to understand the skill better. A vital distinction had to be made between moving on instinct and moving deliberately with thoughts behind every action. If Jake tried to dodge a sword swing intentionally, he first had to register the weapon approaching, then he had to decide to evade, and then the method he would use to avoid it. If he decided to use Shadow Vault, he would have to use the skill, and all the decisions related to that, like which way to dodge, how far, and how fast. If it was done instinctually, however, only the first step was needed, and that was more than handled by Jake's overpowered danger perception. By then, he simply had to not fight what he already instinctively wanted to do, and vault. It was like he just knew what was best to do without deliberating over it. Everyone would naturally rely on instinct there. A boxer blocks based on intuition. When someone throws something at you, you lift your hand to block instinctively. Jake just took the entire concept to another level. He didn't just raise his hand to block something thrown, he would catch it out of the air and fling it back if it was an attack. Of course, his instincts weren't flawless. Relying so much on only his instinct could also easily backfire. Jake wasn't omniscient, and feints had a considerable effect on him. His instinctual reactions also ultimately relied on himself. If he was attacked by a skill he could in no way understand, his instinct wouldn't know how to respond appropriately either. His danger perception did help quite a bit there, but it too had many flaws. If he had to bring up an example, it would be during the fight with William. The final attack had hit him hard. He had been showered with pieces of metal and shot back, taking a lot of damage. His instinct hadn't managed to react, and his danger perception had only activated at the final moment. The same was true for the daggers that William controlled.
can't play at night.
Aunt Nanny.
Cool. You could use mom's phone if you want, because I'm not using it. You could use mom's phone because I'm not using it.
Okay.
JD. Help me out, bro.
What's up?
Do you know what mag goes into this comms RSAS?
Oh, we should get you a better gun.
I have this Uzi.
Yeah, that's the one you
Magnum
should be
Uzi.
using.
Just this one. Sell
Yeah.
the RSAS.
Yeah, that one does 5 times more damage than the RSS.
Oh. Okay. I'll just sell the RSAS then.
Yeah. You just
Okay.
basically use that to farm up 50 mil, and then you buy a Goss.
Where do I buy the Goss at?
A person, because the
Yeah.
Goss from the black market's 200 mil.
Oh shit.
But you can get one from a person for like 40 to 70, depending on what type you want.
Okay. And then, where do I get Halo armor at?
That's the black market. So you want to go Goss gun, and then you go use the Goss gun to farm up for your Anarchy gun, which is 500 million. And then use the Anarchy gun to farm up the Halo stuff, which is 500 million apiece.
Dear Lord. Okay.
Yeah, but you can usually get
Oh,
things
yeah.
cheaper than the black market from people, because like other people are doing the same thing, right? So then they'll buy that Goss gun and then sell it to the next person coming up because they're trying to buy their Anarchy gun.
I see what you mean. Alright. Oh yeah, thanks bro. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So that be fraga.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing part 2 of Anya and Elsia. I was just doing part 2 of Anya and Elsia, but
Huh?
I was just doing part
Yeah.
2 of Anya and Elsia moving out, but now I can't open this. Fine.
What do you? I'll open it. There you go.
Their ethereal movements were hard to understand, making his instinct only able to try and keep up with their attack pattern. His danger perception made him aware of them at all times, but felt more like a constant buzzing telling him that those daggers were dangerous. The way he had won the fight had also been straight up against his instincts. To dodge or block an attack was the most natural thing to do, so his instinct naturally screamed at him to do so. Instead, he had chosen to ignore the attacks and get hit, ultimately gaining an opening to win. If he listened solely to his instincts during that fight, he would likely never have had the chance to land a hit before either he or the caster ran out of resources. While he would undoubtedly have won that battle of endurance, he didn't believe the other party would be stupid enough to stick around long enough to run out. Though, of course, Jake could be wrong. There was also the fact that 5 daggers in the back barely fazed him. They'd penetrated a few centimeters into his flesh, dealing barely any real damage. With his high vitality, he could have taken dozens of those daggers, the only real problem being the pain. Pain his instincts naturally wanted to avoid. Pain is just the body's way of saying, "Dude, you should stop doing that." In the end, his instincts were only a guide or an emergency tool for when his thoughts couldn't keep up. It did also have aspects he couldn't at all understand, however. It seemed to, at times, make him aware of things. It allowed him to get vague feelings around things, such as how strong a beast was compared to himself, or how much damage a specific attack would do before it even hit him. Many warriors of the multiverse likely could do these things. Sensing the power level of others wasn't a new concept at all. Learning how much damage something would do also seemed like a relatively simple ability, if one had enough experience on the battlefield. Even beasts were able to determine how dangerous attacks were. Jake saw several of them avoid the more damaging attacks while just tanking the weaker ones. Of course, it depended entirely on the beast. In the end, he could only sigh at how many unknowns there were. Bloodlines and their associated abilities were only for the holder of the bloodline to truly understand. The system offered no advice, only a simple explanation of the bloodline. And even that had many examples of holding minor flaws or lacking information. Not that Jake had any complaints about his bloodline. He wasn't delusional. He knew it was his greatest weapon. He knew it was the only thing he had not been granted by the system, something that belonged to him and him alone. As he sat there, relaxing, he heard some noise above him and felt like something was looking at him. He focused on his sphere and saw one of the weird-ass birds staring down at him. It was rare they got so close. In fact, this was the first time one of them had ever entered his sphere, and birds weren't real. The sphere of perception confirmed that. When he focused on the bird, all jokes aside, he didn't see a physical animal, but pure energy, a mana density that was just utterly insane. Jake couldn't even find the words to describe how ridiculous it was. Jake felt confused, but he didn't let it show. He still felt a gaze upon him. It was clearly originating from the bird, and yet it wasn't. It made him think. Who or what was observing him? The birds were clearly just mediums of some kind, scouts. Based on their mana density, it wasn't related to any of the survivors. It felt far closer to the power shown by the malefic viper than himself. Was a god behind those birds? If so, why? Did the system allow a god to directly observe like this? Could the god interfere? He didn't think it was the system itself making them. It appeared far too omnipotent to need conjured superbirds to keep an eye on people. Also, those birds had been around since day one, like they were native to this place where the tutorial took place. Like whatever or whoever had placed them here knew that it was a tutorial area. Wait. Jake had been under an assumption for a long time, one that he was beginning to doubt. Who has ever said that the system created the tutorials? What if a god did? Clearly, gods could interfere with the tutorial. Heck, the Viper had placed a dungeon there. Who could say that other gods or powerful entities weren't also influencing things? Who could say a god didn't also create this outside area? Maybe even the rules? Or did a god work with the system to do all these things? Some kind of collaboration? But most importantly, he thought, Why the fuck am I sitting here thinking about stuff I can't in any way, shape, or form find out at the moment, but can just ask the Viper about next time we meet, instead of being productive? So with that, he returned to what was truly important, trying not to shadow vault into trees. Chapter 46. Unexpected Encounter, 1 of 3. For so long they had waited, generation after generation, era after era. Their hope never died, their conviction eternal. Yet the branches died out one by one. Now only a single hull remained, the once glorious order corroded by the march of time. For only the gods were immortal. Only the gods could stand against time and preserve what was. Perhaps the only reason why his hull had survived so long was that they had one such god among them. Here, in this world, they were still respected. They had power, after all. But outside, in the other universes, their once mighty order was nearly forgotten. The Lord Protector, the god who watched over them in place of their patron, had no desire to leave. So they could only wait. Wait for the day of his return. The current Hallmaster was one of those waiting. She had been in her position for many generations, and like the many predecessors, she too was patient, never losing faith. Every year she dreamed of their patron's return, and every year she found herself saddened when nothing happened. If not for the Lord Protector and the grand legacy left behind, perhaps even they would have forgotten the Malefic One. Many, even today, still doubted he would ever return. But she believed that the patron was out there, and as long as they waited, as long as they remained forever faithful, the Malefic One was sure to reemerge. Suddenly, she was awakened from her meditation by an old man teleporting into her chamber. He wore a black robe with a snake's motif on it, one similar to her own. However, his snake was not giving off the same aura as the one on hers. One had to distinguish ranks, after all. "What do you disturb my meditation for?" the Hallmaster asked, slightly annoyed. If this were another petty squabble with the Brimstone conglomerate, heads would roll. "Honored Hallmaster, the Lord Protector has ordered you to his realm, immediately," the man said, bowing deeply. The Hallmaster kneaded her brows, feeling a mix between excitement and fear. This was only the second time she would meet the Lord Protector. The only other time had been during her inauguration as Hallmaster, and even then it was only him making an appearance briefly. She knew that the Hallmaster before her had also only met him twice, the first being his own inauguration, and the second being when he reached the peak of mortality. The Lord Protector didn't even bother to show up at the funeral. "I shall go at once," she answered, as she teleported out of her chamber. She couldn't teleport straight to the entrance of the Lord Protector's realm, but instead had to walk the majority of the way due to all the protective wards and spells put up through the ages. A minor inconvenience compared to the security provided. As she walked further and further down toward the entrance, her nervousness only grew. But at the same time, so did her hope. Had it perhaps finally happened? Unlike most other grand orders or churches like theirs, the Malefic Order did not build grand castles or towers that breached the skies. Instead, they built into the ground, making vast networks of caves, which wasn't to say that the splendor of their order in any way could be belittled. The gloriousness and grandness of their halls were among the best. Caves could easily be far more extensive than some land masses, especially with a bit of space magic mixed in. The entrance to the Lord Protector's realm finally entered her sight after only a few minutes of descending. The portal was unadorned and straightforward, being merely an archway of stone with a portal in it. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through. This was her first time in the Lord Protector's realm, and her expectations were most certainly met. The realm was not very large, perhaps only the space of a few smaller planets, but numerous reptilian creatures lived on the vast landmass that floated beneath her. Very few buildings stood on the entire continent, and only a single one was of any note. The Lord Protector's abode, she assumed. "Come, child, come quickly!" She heard the venerated voice of the Lord Protector as she promptly teleported to the source. The god sounded emotional. After teleporting, she found the Lord Protector all alone, a gleam in his eyes as he stared at a colossal obelisk made of black stone. The Hallmaster had never seen this obelisk before, but she instantly knew what it was, and she knew what this meant. On the obelisk, a rune had lit up, the only rune on it. A profound green aura shrouded the obelisk, making even the Lord Protector's own aura seem weak in comparison. The rune represented a single message, a message they had been waiting for oh so patiently for oh so long. The malefic viper was coming. The Hallmaster could only tighten her knuckles as she started shaking from excitement. Their patron, their one true god, was coming back to them. After eras of waiting, the malefic one would finally return and once more bring glory to their order. Her eternal faith, their undying belief, had not been misplaced. But instantly she was brought back to reality. Oh no! So many preparations had to be made. They had to get everything in the absolute best of conditions. She had to brief all the other leaders and minor branches around their world. There was so much. She only hoped, paradoxically, that the Great One would perhaps take a few more days before he... Hello, little Snappy. Missed me? Old habits die hard. A common phrase for most, one would imagine. But Jake had never thought that a habit could get old after less than a month. Without even thinking about it, he found himself munching on mushrooms. Much to his horror, he even found enjoyment in it. The mana gained was a nice bonus, too. One thing led to another, and now Jake found himself sitting beneath a tree with a mixing bowl in his hand, moss and mushrooms floating in the purified water. After his fight with the boar, and a lot of practice with his new Shadow Vault skill, he was excited to find new, strong opponents to test himself against. But after hours of looking around, he only came across a few weak beasts, none of them even breaking level 20. Barely worth getting out of bed for. So instead, he had gotten bored and started doing a bit of alchemy. It helped calm his nerves, and he needed to practice using his alchemical flame anyway. He had already mixed a few common rarity poisons, and considered if he should start learning how to make stamina potions. He hadn't needed them during the challenge dungeon, as he only used stamina passively, but with his new archer skills, that had changed significantly. He hadn't gotten a level, but it wasn't surprising, considering he had only done alchemy for a few hours, and the concoctions were some he had trained many times before. He still had plenty of ingredients left in his spatial necklace, so he didn't really worry about running out anytime soon. As he was about to begin another concoction, he sensed someone looking at him. At first he thought it was one of the not-bird birds, but it wasn't. Raising his head abruptly and turning to the side, he activated Archer's Eye instinctively and saw a man standing at the top of a hill wearing an archer's cloak similar to his own. Shortly after, he saw 4 other figures appear around the archer. From the looks of it, 3 different kinds of the warrior class and a caster. Jake, with his high perception, used Identify on each of them, as they didn't seem keen on approaching him quite yet either. They were likely also trying to identify him. Human, level 19. Human, level 20. Human, level 18. Human, level 21. Human, level 20. They were all lower than the caster that called himself William, but that wasn't grounds to underestimate them. There were 5 of them, and one of them had a rather mean-looking 2-handed sword. That warrior also happened to be the one at level 21, and was even wearing plate armor. Armor Jake guessed was enchanted, either by upgrading it with a token, or just by finding it. From a quick glance, he noticed that they all seemed to have relatively decent gear. The archer's bow even looked quite a bit nicer than his own. All of their armor or cloaks were for sure upgraded, none of them looking like they only had what one started the tutorial with. From what he could see, there were 4 men and 1 woman. He couldn't see their faces properly, but from their posture they were all clearly on edge, a perfectly understandable response to seeing Jake, a solitary, unidentifiable human in the middle of nowhere. If possible, Jake wanted to avoid conflict and just move on with his day. Then again, information would be useful, as he had some doubts about the validity of what Williams said, considering the guy did turn out to be a backstabbing bastard. Jake, seeing no reason for conflict, acted like he put the mixing bowl beneath his robe as he deposited it into his spatial storage. No reason to openly advertise that he had it, after all. He then got up and started walking toward the 5 people in as non-threatening a manner as he could. Which is to say, he walked with both hands held out in front of him, showing he wasn't armed. Something he could change in the blink of an eye with his spatial storage. The warrior with the 2-hander went a step forward from the group and yelled, "Who are you? Why are you alone out here? And what was that in your hand before?" Jake, seeing no reason to lie, but not exactly feeling like sharing much, told him the truth for the most part. "I'm just an archer, and I am alone because I kind of like it that way. Also, it was just a bowl earlier, see?" He pulled out the bowl once more, making sure to make it seem like he'd taken it out from beneath his cloak. However, they seemed to care little for the bowl, as their gazes all sharpened when he refused to give his name. "Are you Jake?" the caster asked, as she stepped forward, glaring at him with quite a bit of hostility. Jake was a bit taken aback at the question. The only ones in the tutorial who knew his name were the ones his colleagues had shared it with. Richard also knew it, without a doubt, and while he wasn't exactly on friendly terms with Richard, he doubted the man would still have people out hunting for him after so long. Besides, if they knew his colleagues, it was more than worth the risk to strike up a conversation. "Yeah, where did you hear my name?" he asked, hoping to finally get some helpful info. What he got instead was a bolt of ice, followed by an arrow. The 3 warriors didn't stand still either. They all charged the instant they'd confirmed his identity. Jake took a moment to react, as he barely managed to jump to the side to avoid the ranged attacks because of his danger sense. "What the hell is wrong with them?" he asked himself, as he saw the eyes of the opposing party. The hostility was almost palpable as the caster yelled, "This is for Mickey, you fucking psycho!" "Don't lose your cool and let him run," the warrior with the big sword said in a stern tone before he sped up, a green glow swirling around his body. Jake only got more and more confused. Who the fuck is Mickey? But he didn't have time to contemplate further. He jumped backward, dodging the first swing of the warrior. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Perhaps another guy named Jake had killed that guy. It wasn't out of the question for more people named Jake to be in a 1,200-person group. "Listen, I think there is some kind of misunderstanding here. I didn't kill anyone named Mickey as far as I recall. Please just calm down. There is no reason for us to fight." As Jake spoke, he kept dodging the blows of the warrior. "Don't listen to him. Richard warned that he tried shit like this versus the Metal Mage," one of the other warriors, an upgraded light warrior as far as he could see, warned. Jake, at the mention of those 2, instantly sharpened his gaze. So, William and Richard did work together. And it seemed like that caster wasn't happy about their last bout at all, even now sending people after him. Everything suddenly seemed a lot clearer to Jake. They weren't here for revenge for some guy named Mickey. They were here to kill him. Heck, maybe Mickey was a guy from the squad Richard had sent after him so long ago. Not that any of it mattered. In his mind, these 5 were now unquestionably marked as enemies. Yet he wasn't about to give up trying to get something useful out of them. "So you are with Richard and that metal caster, William," he said. "Tell me, do you know of other survivors in his camp? Names such as Jacob, Casper, or Joanna?" An effort that went unrewarded as they all simply continued their assault. Fine, Jake thought. Have it your way. They were slower and weaker than him in pretty much every way. Sure, the warrior, without a doubt, had higher strength than him, but all in all, he still saw them as weak. Compared to William, none of them had shown anything that could genuinely threaten him. Well, he would be in for a lot of hurt if he let that massive 2-hander hit him, but no way was he going to let that happen. Having decided to stop being diplomatic, he no longer held back. He quickly summoned his bow and shadow-vaulted backward, much to the onlookers' shock as they saw him turn shadowy and fly backward. With bow in hand, he decided to go for the weaker ones first. As he was preparing to shoot the caster, however, an arrow with far more power than he expected headed his way, allowing him only narrowly to avoid it. Part of his cloak was still ripped apart from the wind pressure alone. Power shot. Shit! A quick glance informed him that the archer had started charging another power shot, making Jake instantly switch his focus to him. He knew the strength of that skill, but also its massive weakness. Knocking an arrow, he shot it toward the archer, but his attack instead struck a wall of ice that popped up before it. Cursing, Jake could only dodge once more as the two other warriors reached him, one the light warrior and the other a medium warrior, from what he could see. Both upgraded classes too, of course. With his weak defenses, the light warrior became his next target, as he quickly dismissed his bow and drew his bone dagger along with another random archer one. With no time to poison anything, he had to make do. The warrior was faster than Jake with his movements, but Jake had a small edge in strength and a relatively large advantage in technique with his twin fang style, insane perception, and instincts. Positioning himself to block the archer and caster's line of sight, he dodged the medium warrior's sword as he closed in on the light warrior. With slight panic, the man tried to jump back as he threw small knives at Jake. Knives he decided to ignore. He just let them hit his body. The cloak blocked nearly everything, only leaving a few meaningless scratches on his tough body. However, the warrior was far less durable than Jake. Surprised that Jake had just tanked the attack, he took several cuts across the chest with the bone dagger before Jake tried to finish him off by plunging his other dagger into his neck. Sadly, he had no time to assess if the man was a goner, as the two remaining warriors had reached him once more. Shadow vaulting away, he once more drew his bow and started bombarding both of them with arrows. The heavy warrior manipulated the aura around his body to block them, with the medium warrior choosing to dodge instead. A dodging attempt he failed, as an arrow nailed him in the leg. Seeing his opportunity, Jake managed to land 2 more arrows on the man before he had to shadow bolt once more as another power shot came his way. With some distance, he withdrew a bottle of necrotic poison and retreated behind a tree, still keeping an eye on the warriors that were within his sphere of perception. He had bought himself some time to apply the poison as he saw the party try and save their comrades. He had confidence in the damage on the light warrior being lethal. However, the medium warrior seemed to already be getting up, his wounds healing rapidly. Not natural health wounds rapidly, but a self-healing skill rapidly. Something that wouldn't happen again that easily with poison in the mix. More than a dozen arrows, now soaked in some of his most potent common rarity poison, went back into the quiver. Okay, round 2. Chapter 47. Unexpected Encounter, 2 of 3. If simply taken as an archer, Jake wasn't anything overly impressive. He was relatively strong and fast. Currently was his potent toxin. A single arrow or a single cut transformed from a minor wound to almost certain death. And now he had applied his poison. He hadn't done it from the beginning of the fight for many reasons. First of all, he wasn't sure it would turn into a battle. Secondly, he wanted information more than anything, and if it didn't end in a fight, he would just waste a bottle of poison. Now, however, the time for talking was over. From behind the tree, he saw his enemies get ready to flank him once more, a tactic he would gladly exploit. Taking a normal, non-poisoned arrow, he knocked it and started charging a power shot. The skill was weak in open combat, usually, but it had its time to shine. Now was one such time. With the timing just right, as the medium warrior entered his line of fire, he released the arrow. The man didn't even have time to react before he was hit, the arrow exploding from the impact when it hit his chest. The man wasn't left in a much better state than the arrow, as a huge, gaping hole had blown open in his upper chest, taking with it his heart and lungs. Needless to say, the man was well and truly dead. Having 2 down, he switched to poison arrows as he shadow vaulted away from the tree once more, seeking refuge behind another. Them being unable to pin him down was a significant advantage that he didn't want to lose. Besides, while the plate-wearing warrior was undoubtedly strong and had formidable defenses, he had gotten that by having far worse mobility. Hence, he would be saved for last. 2 shadow vaults later, he discovered that the enemy archer had entered his sphere, and from how he moved, he was not yet aware of Jake's location. Seeing him split up from the ice caster, he made his move. He stalked the archer with his sphere as a guide while staying out of sight from all 3 enemies. The other archer moved slowly, only at walking speed, with his bow fully drawn and ready to shoot at any sudden movement. His caution was natural, but misplaced. Jake never planned to enter his line of sight, after all. As the archer entered a small clearing, Jake saw his chance and shot an arrow from directly behind the man. He managed to react only at the very last moment, but still ended up with an arrow hitting him on his upper backside, an annoying but otherwise very easily manageable wound, if the necrotic poison was disregarded, that is. The archer only had time to roll out of the way and rip the arrow out before he felt that something was wrong. At first, he felt a weird numbness, followed by intense pain that seemed to spread through his very being. Next, he was hit by the smell of rotting flesh. The archer yelled in horror, attracting his comrade, who rushed over to him. Jake had taken refuge behind a tree once more, but kept close enough for the dying archer to still be within his sphere. The warrior and caster made it to their dying comrade and were both stopped dead when they saw the archer rolling on the ground, shrieking in an inhuman voice. As he rolled around, pieces of rotten black flesh fell off. The grisly sight ended before long, as the screaming also died down. It had taken less than half a minute from the arrow hitting to his death. Yet this half a minute was enough to bring endless nightmares to those seeing it. Before the two, the archer barely resembled a human anymore. The entire back area and most of the upper body had completely rotted away. An entire arm was lying off to the side, having become detached as the archer rolled around. Even from behind the tree, Jake had to take deep breaths to calm himself. This was the first time he'd seen the actual result of his poison taking effect. The only other time he had done anything like this was when he used touch of the malefic viper on a beast. But this had been human. He still vividly remembered the water from the second challenge room that nearly killed him. The feeling of your limbs slowly rotting away, the indescribable pain. He didn't like it. He didn't like it one bit. But poisons were his best weapon. In the end, the only thing he could calm himself down with was that he hadn't been the aggressor. They had attacked first. He was just defending himself. They were allies of Richard and William, two people who both had attempted to have him killed before. They were his enemies. To your enemies, you show no mercy. He remembered a conversation he'd had with the malefic viper during his visit to his realm. The viper told a story from when he was younger, before he became a god. He spoke of how he had just gotten the ability to assume a humanoid form and how he had tried to enter the world of civilization and become, well, civilized. The malefic viper talked of his naivete back then. He believed that the enlightened humanoid races were not like the beasts he was used to, but would have values above simply striving for more strength. He had gotten close to people, and he had believed them as if he were a gullible child. Beasts didn't lie, after all. They either attacked or retreated. A monster that would first become your friend, only to then stab you in the back, was unheard of to him. Until it happened. Over wealth, the malefic viper was betrayed, and his betrayers attempted to kill him. Of course, even then, his strength was above most of his peers, and he was not so easily thwarted. But yet again, he had believed the man when he claimed it was all a big misunderstanding. So he spared him out of misplaced compassion and benevolence, a benevolence returned by having the few humanoid friends he had made slaughtered. The man had hired a far more powerful force to take down the malefic viper out of something as simple as pure pride. He had made a contract with a powerful king to hunt down the viper and steal his treasures. Of course, the malefic viper returned this favor by massacring the man and his forces, and then delivering his head to the country of the foolish king, personally. In retrospect, the viper confessed it was perhaps an overreaction to let the entire kingdom face his wrath. It ended up resulting in the destruction of 9 planets. After this entire inhuman massacre, the malefic viper was not shunned or hunted. Even if he had killed innocents, women, children, and elderly, he was never admonished for any of it. Instead, he was revered for his power, praised for his boldness. But more importantly, no one dared to assist anyone in ever betraying him again. as the consequences were now clear as day. The lesson the Malefic Viper wanted to teach Jake was a few things. The first was to not trust blindly and to not show mercy to one's enemies. The second point was that power ruled supreme. Might makes right, as the saying goes. Additionally, if one shows the cruelty and the ability to cross certain lines, your enemies will hesitate and falter the next time they deal with you. Jake didn't fully agree with this interpretation, as cruelty can also lead to a far stronger response than one predicted. In such cases, the enemy will not be discouraged from fighting, but instead be far more resolute in destroying you, throwing all caution to the wind. And that was precisely the situation Jake now found himself in. After the initial fear wore off, the warrior and icecaster didn't flee or go on the defensive. Instead, they abandoned all signs of caution as they both yelled obscenities. "Get the fuck out here, you fucking coward!" the warrior yelled, followed by the icecaster calling him far more insulting things. Not that Jake necessarily disagreed with some of the things they called him. He just honestly didn't care. Allies of William and Richard didn't have any right to teach him anything about decency and honor. Withdrawing another bottle of poison from his necklace, he prepared himself to strike. Jumping out from behind the tree, he fired an arrow at the delirious woman. As he had expected, the blow was blocked as a shield of ice popped up behind her, automatically activated from what he could see. This, of course, gave away Jake's position, as both turned toward him, rage in their eyes. Spikes of ice started coalescing in the air as the caster stepped out from behind her wall, and the warrior charged toward him, still enveloped in the same green aura. Jake was fully aware that his regular arrows couldn't break through this green aura, so instead, he threw the bottle he had prepared earlier. While the bottle's speed was slower than an arrow, it was still far too fast for the warrior to avoid. The bottle struck him as he blocked with his arm, the liquid within splashing all over his upper body. A sizzling sound was heard, that of aura being eroded, and the man retreated as he seemingly focused on protecting himself. Jake was aware that the necrotic poison was far weaker thrown like that compared to getting applied to an arrow, but he had to make do. With the warrior out of the way, Jake made his way toward the ice caster. After only a few steps, the ice spikes she'd begun conjuring earlier made their way toward him, prompting him to make a full-power shadow vault straight through the spikes. He felt a considerable drain on his mana as he passed through spike after spike, but the tactic paid off. He now found himself within only a few meters of the caster, whose facial expression had changed from one of pure anger to one of abject fear. Giving her no quarter, Jake continued his assault by stepping toward her and activating Shadow Vault another time. Just as he vaulted, a wall of ice started getting summoned, but it was too late. Before the wall could fully form, Jake appeared behind the caster and went for an overhead swing, straight for her head. In a final gambit, the caster seemed to release all her mana, sending a wave of frost exploding out of her. It hit Jake and froze the ground all around her. Jake, however, did not retreat. He instead pushed forward, bringing down the dagger on the woman. Her toughness proved inadequate as the dagger managed to enter the top of her skull. He hadn't poisoned the blade, but he knew this blow was lethal either way. The notification hitting him less than a second. second after his attack landed only confirmed as much. Not that he had time to look, as one opponent remained. With an explosion of ice and green aura, the wall made by the caster was smashed apart by the warrior charging through it. His armor and body had clear signs of the poison